This morning we're kicking off the new series on marriage, so I thought I'd bring a picture from my own wedding when Stephen and I got married. This is obviously a picture of a picture because digital images did not exist when I got married. And as we talk about expectations in marriage today, I thought there are very few pictures that capture so much expectation as a wedding day. This series is entitled Extraordinary Marriage because over the next several weeks, we're going to look at different aspects of marriage while asking, how do we deal with the ordinary things of marriage in an extraordinary way? So today we're going to talk about expectations and communication. And in the coming weeks, you'll hear from several different women about conflict and stress, or shared values, intimacy and vulnerability, work, money, kids and parenting, family and friends, lots of ordinary topics that affect us all to some degree. And please note that we are not the extraordinary part. Not any of you, and not any of us that are going to stand up here. We are asking God to move in extraordinary ways in our hearts and move in our marriages so that we might glorify Him and so that our marriages might reflect His love not only to our spouse, but also to those around us. And I want to clarify that God is not only glorified in the longevity of marriage. Longevity can be great. Stephen and I are coming up on 20 years of being married in May, and I can say wholeheartedly that I love him more today than I really knew was possible in that picture of our wedding day. And some of you might be here this morning and you feel close to your spouse and you feel safe in your marriage. And some of you might be sitting here today hoping that no one truly sees the pain and the loneliness that you feel within your marriage. Some of you might be going through a difficult season, and God might be glorified in your endurance through the hard spaces. But there also might be some of you in situations in your marriage that this series will not be enough for. If your marriage has experienced or is experiencing abuse, addiction, or an affair, I really encourage you to reach out for help. You might benefit from the professional help of a counselor, but please reach out to someone. Marriage can feel isolating because no one really understands the dynamics of marriage like you do, of your own marriage. But I want everyone to hear this. No marriage has it all together. And you belong at this table today, regardless of what your marriage feels like right now. My son, Drew, who is currently in 7th grade, he joined the robotics team at his school this year, which is new for us. It has been a bit of a steep learning curve for Stephen and I, as Drew did not get this part of his brain from either of us. And as I was driving Drew to his first competition, he mentioned that he was nervous about how their robot was going to perform. And he said he thinks that the team built a good robot, but he doesn't think it's perfect. So unfortunately, they're going to have to see how it performs on the challenges and then improve it along the way. And that felt discouraging to him. And as gently as I could, I told him that this is life. That not getting it right the first time isn't a failure, it's part of the process. And like building a robot before you've used it on the field, premarital counseling probably didn't fully prepare you for marriage. And marriage might not be quite like you thought it would be. And though it's really hard to assess what is working and what isn't working while you're in the middle of it, reflection and growth in marriage is a good thing. It's not a failure. It's part of the process. One of the expectations that I think is dashed most quickly in marriage is the realization that our spouse isn't perfect. In fact, I think this one's easier to recognize than the fact that we are also an imperfect spouse. I want to read a little excerpt from Tim Keller's Meaning of Marriage. Both men and women today want a marriage in which they can receive emotional and sexual satisfaction from someone who will simply let them be themselves. They want a spouse who is fun, intellectually stimulating, sexually attractive, with many common interests, and who, on top of it all, is supportive of their personal goals and of the way they are living now. And if your desire is for a spouse who will not demand a lot of change from you, then you are also looking for a spouse who is almost completely pulled together, someone very low maintenance without much in the way of personal problems. You are looking for someone who will not require or demand significant change. You are searching, therefore, for an ideal person, happy, healthy, interesting, content with life. Never before in history has there been a society filled with people so idealistic in what they are seeking in a spouse. Now, if we say out loud, I expect my spouse to be perfect, it sounds ridiculous. We would never say that. But I mean, he should at least be able to get pretty close. Your spouse definitely has flaws. And that doesn't excuse certain behaviors, but it does help us acknowledge that on your spouse's best day, he will still not respond to you in exactly the way that you thought it would go in your mind. My husband, Stephen, and I took a trip to Italy for our 10th anniversary. And we met up there with my sister and her husband, who was living in England at the time because her husband's British. And we went to the museum that has the Michelangelo statue, the David, because I think that's what you're supposed to do when you're in Italy. But also because my sister is an artist and she really wanted to go there. On one hand, it was helpful that she enjoys art because she seemed to understand what she was looking at in ways that I did not. And on the other hand, we spent way longer in museums than I thought was possible. And yet she would have stayed longer if I wasn't there. But nonetheless, we spent a significant amount of time looking at the David, which is truly huge and amazing and lifelike, despite being made of stone. Yet one thing that stood out to me, since I had lots of time, was that along the hallway, walking in to see the David, there's all these partial statues that Michelangelo worked on but never finished. So it would be like a block of stone with a head, or like a block of stone with an arm carved into part of it. And the carved part was smooth and beautiful, and the rest of it was literally a block of stone. So I thought marriage was going to be like getting a rough, full statue of a husband, that God refines him and makes him shiny, and little touch-ups along the way. And I didn't really think that if we're getting married in the first quarter-ish of the average lifespan, there might actually be 3/4 left of a huge stone block to carve. This probably isn't a perfect example, but when I view my husband as a partially carved block of marble, then God is still working on him, and God's timing isn't behind schedule. Again, I'm not trying to excuse behavior. I'm just offering a perspective that we're all in progress. And I wonder what could happen if we shift our goal for us and our spouse from being a pretty statue now to our goal to be being a good block of marble that's moldable, that God can continue to shape throughout our life. Trusting Philippians 1:6, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Not now. That completion doesn't happen now. Another misunderstood expectation is that marriage is based on loving feelings. Now, love is certainly foundational to marriage, and loving feelings are hopefully part of your marriage to some degree. But I want to read part of 1 Corinthians 13. This is verses 4 through 6, which we've probably all heard before, possibly at our own wedding. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. And you know what it doesn't say? Love feels good. Love is enjoyable at all times. Love gives you warm fuzzies inside. Marriages go through changes and seasons. We change. We discover more about who we are. Our life changes. We move houses or cities. We change jobs. We have kids or we can't have kids. We age. Our bodies change. When I was younger, my family of origin camped a lot. And we lived in central Illinois at the time, and so we would travel to Colorado to camp along the way. And there was this campground in Nebraska called the Lone Duck Campground. And in my mind, we camped there a lot. It might have actually been once, but this memory is solid. So our campsite was right along this bubbling brook, and my sisters and I would play in the water and jump from rock to rock or wade in the shallow water and then fall asleep to the sound of the stream that was right next to us. In the beginning of our marriage relationship, it's often like a bubbling brook. It's exciting, it's fun, it's always it's thrilling to watch the water always changing, it feels cool on your toes. And as we tend to our relationship and the relationship matures, it's not so much that the bubbling brook calms. It's more that it grows into a deep river. And it might not seem too exciting to look at on the surface. Sometimes I cross the Arkansas River and I really don't even look down at it. But rivers are strong, and they're wide, and they're deep. And there's a lot more life in a river than there is in that bubbling brook. When I first became a mom, I fed my infant and wiped her bottom what seemed like around the clock. But I don't wonder why my 14-year-old is now feeding and wiping herself. Because relationships often need to grow and change to stay healthy, and that's a good thing. So if we're looking back longingly at that bubbling brook, we may need to adjust our expectations and recognize that the deepening river of our marriage is refreshing in its own way, and acknowledge that that growth just might not look like what we thought. The last expectation that we're going to talk about overlaps the communication part of our teaching, and it's that no one can read minds. No one. Not one person. And this means that if we want to truly understand our husband, we need to ask caring and clarifying questions rather than assuming that we know what he wants and needs. And then we need to listen to him when he answers. And if we truly want to be understood, we need to be willing to vulnerably share our own heart rather than expect him to know what we want and need, or even know to ask the right question. Within the first year of our marriage, Stephen and I got into a decently large argument about cheese. He was going to grill burgers that evening, and I was going to run to the grocery store first. And so I asked him if he wanted cheese on his burger. And in my opinion, it took him way too long to answer a simple question. He thought about it, and then he said yes. And then he said, no, it's okay. We don't need to spend money on cheese. We'd never eat it all. It would be a huge waste. And I stood there baffled at what was taking place in this non-conversation between us. So I went to my trusty go-to, which is anger. And what we eventually realized is that I came into the conversation picturing a 10-slice pack of cheese, which I could easily finish as quickly as I needed to because it's cheese. And Stephen was picturing 150 pack of individually wrapped slices of Kraft Singles that his family used to buy, which was definitely not needed for our 2 burgers. So it wasn't that one of us was wrong. It was that we both had different ideas of what cheese we were talking about. And rather than explaining that to each other and trying to understand each other, we turned on each other. We did this frequently enough that about a number of topics that the couple that was mentoring us at the time suggested that when we started to argue, we should put a pillow on the floor, just drop it and point at it and say, this is what we're arguing about. This is the cheese. So that we could visually remind ourselves that we're not working against each other. We are working together to figure out the cheese. Because picturing different types of sliced cheese wasn't a character issue. And we needed to practice clear communication with each other that doesn't expect the other person to read our minds. When we are communicating with our spouse, it is important to think about time, place, and tone. Timing matters. At the end of a long day for either of you, it might not be a good time to talk through something difficult. There's certain times of the month that are almost guaranteed to produce futile arguments. And you don't have to say what you're thinking or feeling right in that moment. Place. Respect that your husband has feelings too, and no one enjoys being humiliated in front of family and friends. And tone. Yelling isn't the only way to say unkind words. Remember to be kind. Try to imagine hearing yourself speak and think if you would like someone to speak to you like that. The goal of marriage isn't to eliminate all conflict. In true relationship, conflict will be present because we are broken people who live in a broken world. And loving someone deeply is vulnerable. And loving deeply means we can be hurt deeply. But when there's conflict, we need to lean in and talk kindly to each other with the goal of seeking understanding more than seeking to be understood. And kind words are actually pretty helpful in marriage, even when you're not in conflict. Stephen is a big ideas person. He loves to dream. He likes to think of ideas. He adds a lot of fun to our family because of this. But I used to picture these ideas like Stephen handing me the string of different helium-filled balloons. I'm not really a dreamer, so it easily felt overwhelming to me to hold on to all these balloons that I didn't need. So I popped them. I would tell him how his idea could never happen, and then I'd explain why. And to be fair, I wasn't wrong. I was just unkind. He needs that space in our marriage to dream and imagine, and eventually, he lets balloons go when they're not needed. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes because he forgets about them. But I had to learn the importance of that space and then grow in my own capacity to not be overwhelmed by that space so that he can feel safe and loved within our marriage. Now, since Stephen and I got married young, we had been married for 2 years when he graduated from college. I was on the slow track because I changed my major. And he received some money for graduation. And it was important to him that we spent the money on something fun rather than on bills. So we decided to buy a tandem bike. So we went on some rides with friends of ours that rode tandem before we bought ours to make sure that we actually liked it and could do it. So this couple who has kids close to our age was telling us how much they love riding tandem and how much it's a picture of marriage because you have to work together and all this stuff. So Stephen and I were going to practice just riding around their cul-de-sac just to get the feel for the bike before we actually started this longer ride with them. And as we both got on, we started pedaling, but when Stephen tried to clip his shoe into the pedal, he struggled for a sec, and so he quit pedaling. And if any of you have ridden a bike, you know that if you stop pedaling, you fall over. So when I realized what was happening, seeing him in front of me, not getting his shoe clipped in, without even thinking, I jumped off that bike so fast. And Stephen, who had now gotten his shoe clipped in, fell over in the slowest possible way, scraping up his leg and the bike. And we looked back at our friends. We hadn't made it very far. And we looked back at our friends who were a little surprised at how quickly I bailed. And were probably a little concerned with what that said about our marriage. And I stubbornly was like, oh, I saw what was happening. I wasn't going down. There have definitely been seasons of our marriage that it would have been easier to bail than work through those seasons together and lean into the ways that we hurt each other. But there is a depth to our love that we have found when we leaned in together and came out on the other side of that pain. Now, there's a tension here between acknowledging that we are responsible for ourselves and our own decisions, but also leaning into the commitment of marriage and realizing that moving through those seasons together builds strength and trust. Now, again, this is not to place guilt on those of you experiencing abuse, addiction, and an affair. This is to instill hope in the marriages that are wondering if maybe you married the wrong person. Wondering if this difficult time is a season or if it's the new normal. And I would encourage you to lean into what God is teaching you and let God be the one that brings the growth to your spouse and to your marriage. Luke 6:43 through 45 says, "For no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks." Now, don't get caught up on the good versus evil and are we good people and that. The point is that if you are a tree growing alongside your spouse, who's also a tree, hang with me here. If you bear bad fruit, your bad fruit is not a response to the bad fruit of the tree next to you. Your tree is known by your own fruit, and it comes from within you. And at some point, we have to stop blaming the tree next to us for the rotten fruit on our own branch. We need to keep our own root system grounded in the Word and spend time watering those roots with water from a well that never runs dry. Your marriage will have seasons of grief and loss, seasons of joy, seasons of stress, dry seasons. There will be seasons when you have to adjust your expectations of what marriage looks like and what growth looks like. And there will be seasons that you have to work extra hard to communicate clearly and kindly. There will be seasons that you need to do some hard personal work, reflecting on ways that you can work through the hard parts of your own story so that you can build your own capacity for healthy love. And this is all what a true picture of a good, healthy marriage looks like. It's certainly not perfect, and it's not Instagram worthy, but it's a deep river that reflects a glimpse of the love that Christ has for us. Let me pray over you guys. Lord, we need you to move in us, to move in our marriages. We are selfish, we're petty, we're angry and bitter, we're insecure, we forget to be kind, we want to be loved well more than we want to love well. Lord, forgive us. Help us to love, help us to care, help us to be kind. We can't do this without you, and I pray that we wouldn't want to do this without you. We invite you into the vulnerable spaces of our marriage and ask you to do what only you can.